Michael, thank you so much for having us at your beautiful villa.
Thanks for coming.
Well, it's been a crazy few weeks. I really thought that at the time of this recording, it would be $100,000 Bitcoin. Our 100K interview hasn't happened yet, but it could any moment. I just want to first start with your reaction to the recent price rally as the result of the red wave sweeping the country.
Well, I think clearly the most uncertain thing, the greatest form of uncertainty, is the result of the elections on November 5th. And the elections could have been a blue wave, they could have been a red wave, they could have been red and blue, they could have been red, white, and blue. And we didn't really know at 8 p.m. on Tuesday night, November 5th. Just was unclear. But by the next morning, by 6:30 or 7 a.m. on November 6th, it became pretty clear that there was going to be a red wave and that Trump was going to win the White House, the Republicans were going to win the Senate, and it seemed quite likely the Republicans would win the House. I think that there are many, many paths in the future, but clearly the significance of the red wave is the nation has spoken, and the will of the country is they would like more freedom. They would like more innovation. They would like smaller government. They would like lower taxes. They would like less regulation. They would like more empowerment. They would like more inspiration. They'd like more Bitcoin. They would like more digital assets. They'd like to see the digital transformation of the world. This was a referendum on Elon Musk and SpaceX versus NASA. Do we want the government to run the space program, and do we want it to be a cost-plus contract, or do we want the private enterprise to take us to Mars? And I think it's a stark reminder that the American people, they believe in freedom and charging toward the frontier. So it was a big win for Trump. It was a big win for Elon Musk. It was a big win for freedom of speech. I think that it was probably one of the more extraordinary things, maybe one of the more extraordinary things of the century. And it would be very difficult to forecast the future of the crypto industry, the digital assets industry, and Bitcoin before and now. We actually have a lot more clarity about what's coming next.
Well, let's get very specific about that. What do you expect with this incoming administration when it comes to Bitcoin and the regulatory environment?
Well, I think what we clearly heard from Donald Trump is never sell your Bitcoin. Big question was, does the United States sell Bitcoin? Does the United States buy Bitcoin? If you recall, the German government sold a lot of Bitcoin at $55,000 a Bitcoin. It turns out to be a more than $1 billion mistake in a couple of weeks. Big mistake. Mm-hmm. And people used to speculate, well, you know, is the government going to dump the Bitcoin? Are they not? And now what you see is Trump is pro-Bitcoin. And with the red sweep, that means the Republicans run the Senate, control the Senate, and they control the House, which means that pro-Bitcoin senators, like Senator Lummis, have now moved from being in the minority to being in the majority. In the minority, you watch the laws being written. In the majority, you write the laws, you pass the laws. Before November 5th, there was actually broad consensus in the House and the Senate to repeal SAB 121. And they did. And the president vetoed it. So what I would expect is that SAB 121 will be either withdrawn by the SEC or it will be repealed, and the president will support the repeal. That opens the way for banks to custody Bitcoin. That opens the way for the entire banking system to embrace Bitcoin. And I think for Bitcoin to grow by a factor of 100x from here, we need for the banking system of the world to support Bitcoin. So if I think about the consequences for Bitcoin, I think what this means is it's an acceleration of pro-Bitcoin regulations. I think that we'll see in-kind creation and redemption of Bitcoin ETFs. I think we'll see the repeal of SAB 121. I think we'll see support for Bitcoin within the banking system from the banking regulators, from Treasury, from OCC, from SEC. I think you'll see more supportive legislation from Congress. I think it will be approved by the White House. I think that this is a signal to accelerate institutional adoption. I think that the previous administration had been hostile to Bitcoin mining, hostile to Bitcoin banking, hostile to the Bitcoin ETFs, and the failure of Silicon Valley Bank followed by the shutdown, effectively the forcible liquidation of Silvergate and Signature, even though those were solvent banks. They were perfectly healthy banks that were actually forced into receivership by a hostile administration. I think that had caused the banking establishment, reasonably enough, to be skittish and to be conservative and a little bit slow to adopt Bitcoin because they could see there was resistance in the administration. I think that now, with a new administration, with President Trump coming to the Bitcoin conference in Nashville and saying, I will end the war on crypto, I will end the war on Bitcoin, I will support Bitcoin, we will not sell our Bitcoin, we're going to make Bitcoin in America. America is going to be the capital of Bitcoin, right? The fact that he said that, I think that sets the tone at the top. That means I think, number one, it seems inconceivable to me that a head of the Treasury or the CFTC or the SEC will be appointed that is anti-Bitcoin or anti-crypto, right? That seems quite obvious. We know that Trump is all in on crypto, all in on Bitcoin. So I think that we'll have favorable, supportive cabinet members. I think the second thing is we know we'll have a supportive Congress. Congress was already in favor of Bitcoin, before November 5th. We'll have a supportive Senate. The Republican senators were already in favor of Bitcoin. The Democratic senators have been sidelined and won't have any power in this regard. So Elizabeth Warren's agenda is going to become largely a thing of the past and irrelevant in the White House, in the Senate, and the Congress of the future. So I think that all of this suggests an acceleration of institutional adoption. It's a signal that it's okay for insurance companies to think about insuring Bitcoin companies. It's a signal that it's okay for banks to bank Bitcoin and crypto companies. It's a signal that it's okay for Wall Street to start to embrace, endorse, and advocate Bitcoin, right? It's a signal that the president and the administration is going to look at things like Operation Choke Point as hostile to the interest of the industry. I think if you combine that with the pro-business and the pro-American agenda of the red wave, it's pretty clear that this administration wants to grow business in America. It wants to deregulate. It wants to strip away handcuffs. It wants to lower taxes. It wants to accelerate progress and then the passage to the future in the United States. And all of that, I think, is just very auspicious for Bitcoin and the digital assets industry.
Coin Stories is proudly brought to you by Bitdeer, a global leader in disruptive technology for Bitcoin mining and AI. As a publicly traded leader, Bitdeer boasts a massive 2.5 gigawatts of electrical capacity and infrastructure under development across 3 continents, positioning Bitdeer as one of the most diversified and power-dense computing companies in the world. Bitdeer's leadership pioneered the original advancements in Bitcoin mining ASICs and is now poised to disrupt the market again with groundbreaking new designs for the next generation of mining ASICs that are targeted to reach efficiencies of as low as 5 joules per terahash by late next year. Now they're leveraging years of expertise in data center and cloud management into high-performance computing through a partnership with NVIDIA. Join Bitdeer in reshaping the world of Bitcoin mining. Learn more at bitdeer.com and explore how they are pioneering the future today. Well, real quick, what do you say to people who are watching this who did not vote for President Trump and they didn't want to see a red wave sweep the country?
Well, I think that oftentimes in elections, there's very polarized rhetoric on both sides. And the information that's fed to people in the Democratic Party and watching Democratic channels of communication, Democratic television, and blue media, is oftentimes a very narrow and sometimes distorted view of reality. I think that a lot of the fears that people had were probably driven by amplified campaign rhetoric. And likely the things they're worried about aren't really going to be a problem, and the things that they need, they're going to get, even though they didn't know that they needed them, or they didn't know they're going to get them. So I think that ultimately this will begin a healing process for the country. I think ultimately everybody in the country wants prosperity. Everybody in the country wants freedom. Everybody in the country wants empowerment. We all know we need to go to the future. We all need to leave the past behind. And I think that we're looking at many, many years of prosperity and empowerment ahead of us because of what's happened.
And Bitcoin is that neutral tool that will hopefully help us get there. One of Trump's campaign promises was to create a U.S. strategic Bitcoin stockpile. How quickly could we see something like that manifest, and what are the implications?
I think it'll be on the agenda as soon as the new administration is seated in late January. I think Senator Lummis has an ambitious agenda in the first 100 days to put it before Congress. I think we'll actually see action on it in 2025. And, with a supportive House, a supportive Senate, and a supportive White House, I think something will happen. The only question is to what extent, right? Will it be the Lummis bill? Will it be max? Will it be double max? Will it be a Trump max strategy? Now, the logic of the bill and the logic of the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve is simple. Buy the future, right? Once upon a time, the British looked to the New World and they realized the future was the New World. They came to the New World. It actually was the New World that powered the British Empire. That's why they won the Napoleonic Wars. That's why they were the greatest empire of the 17th, the 18th, the 19th century. They were fueled by the power of the New World, just like the Spanish Empire was fueled by the gold of the New World. Eventually, the 13 colonies realized they needed to go west, and as they expanded west, the United States grew into a formidable power. With the Louisiana Purchase, we doubled the landmass of the United States. Without the Louisiana Purchase, there would be no St. Louis. No place for you to get married. And that was a pretty good purchase. We did well there. That was Napoleon selling Louisiana to fund a war that he lost, and the U.S. doubling in size. What happened next was the acquisition of Texas, Nevada, the Western Territories, and California. Also going west again. It turned out to be a good trade. Made America, it created Hollywood, it created Silicon Valley, right? It gave America Apple and Google and Facebook and Amazon and movies and music and the Eagles and LA, and made us the cultural capital of the world. And the Mexicans were not the cultural capital of the world. And I'm sure they would like to have kept it, but they didn't. And then we acquired Alaska from the Russians. And it turned out that there were trillions of dollars of minerals and energy underneath Alaska. And that is manifest destiny. So nations grow by expanding into territories where they can where they can generate extreme prosperity and productivity. And now there's nowhere further west to expand. The new frontier is cyberspace. You can't go west, you need to go up. You need to go into cyberspace. And Bitcoin is cyberspace. And the logic of the strategic Bitcoin reserve is, why don't we buy the future? Why don't we buy 20%, X%, anywhere from 5 to 25% of the future? And if the United States acquires 20% of cyberspace, then all of the capital from the past, from the 20th century, from the 19th century, the gold of the 19th century, the real estate, the bonds, the stocks of the 20th century, they're going to flow into the 21st century. That's the money that's going from traditional money to Bitcoin. And all of the capital from China and Russia and Africa and South America and Europe, it's going to flow into cyberspace. It's going to flow into Bitcoin. So the geopolitical logic of the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which kind of understates it, it makes it sound like we're just buying it in case we need it. It's really the strategic Bitcoin expansion, right? We're putting a flag in cyberspace where all the money in the world is about to head. And the logic is, we might as well get there before the rest of the world decides they need to settle in the Manhattan of cyberspace. If we do that, it makes us rich. The Lummis bill is worth $16 trillion to the United States in its current form. If they up that, it could be worth double or triple or quadruple that much. We can address the national debt, reduce the national debt, retire the entire national debt. That's obviously a good idea. Getting rich is obviously a good idea. Retiring the national debt with other people's money is a good idea. And of course, if you're a neocon, the best idea would be to retire the national debt with your enemy's money, right? So this is there's a kind of a thing of beauty here. If the enemies of the United States see all their capital flow into cyberspace where we own it. And so one part of the pie is buy the future. The other part of the pie, or the other idea, is attract all the capital from the rest of the world into cyberspace, floating above the United States. You know, and the third idea is, should anybody ever decide that they wanna recapitalize their company or their country on something other than U.S. Treasury bills. And by the way, the Russians own Treasury bills. The Chinese use United States sovereign debt. Our enemies used our sovereign Treasury bills or our sovereign debt. Our friends use it. Everyone uses it. If anybody ever decides they don't want to capitalize on that and they want to go to the next thing, they're not going to go back to gold. They're not going to go to silver. They're not going to go to glass beads or bales of tobacco or seashells. They're not going to be able to capitalize on their own fiat currencies because every other currency is weaker than the dollar. They're going to have to go to something stronger, faster, smarter. They're going to have to go to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the future world reserve capital network. And so should people decide that they want to move to the world reserve capital network, which is Bitcoin, the smartest thing for the United States is make sure they own that too. And so the beauty is, in the world post-Satoshi, money bifurcates into currency and capital. Mm-hmm. Currency is the medium of exchange. It's the legal tender. It's the dollar is the world reserve currency, and everything else in the world is pegged to the dollar. The Chinese currency is pegged to the dollar. The Emirati currency is pegged to the dollar. The euro is almost pegged to the dollar. One of the aspects of money is currency. The United States owns the world reserve currency. Right. It's a great advantage for us. The other aspect of money is capital, long-term store of value. I don't need to buy coffee with it. I don't need to pay my rent with it. I want to feed my family 100 years from now with it. I want to be rich forever with it. That capital, and the money in the form of capital, is a profoundly new idea, because the wealthy and the institutions, well, the wealthy have used real estate as capital for the past 100 years, or they've used stocks and S&P ETFs, indexes, as capital. And institutions, banks, and operating companies, they have used sovereign debt. They have used debt as capital. And now here's the big idea. The people that use real estate and equity as capital, Harvard University, Yale, rich people, Bill Gates, all the wealthy people in the world, every wealthy family, the people that used property or equity as capital, they're still rich. The people that use debt as capital, banks, the banks are insolvent. If you actually used sovereign debt as capital for the past 4 years, you have a -5% nominal yield.
Yeah.
Now, who else uses sovereign debt as capital? Operating companies. So public companies and banks, operating companies, are forced to use toxic capital, which is weak capital, I'll call it. The US dollar is great as currency. It's not great as capital. All the Bitcoiners know this. And so, and money, what is money? Well, money is fungible, a fungible liquid asset. Well, the problem, why is real estate can't be money? Because you can't buy a cup of coffee with a building in London, right? A building's not money.
Right.
It is capital. It's a liquid, non-fungible capital. How about a share of Apple stock? Is it money? Not really. It's fungible capital. Nvidia stock, Apple stock's fungible capital, but it's not real. You can't like buy a cup of coffee on Saturday morning with your Apple stock. So capital assets in the 20th century aren't money. Currency is money, but currency is not a good capital asset. Post Satoshi, all of a sudden we have a money which is a capital asset, which is Bitcoin. And now the significance of what's going on with the strategic Bitcoin reserve is the United States is going to own the world's reserve capital network, Bitcoin. We're going to mine Bitcoin. The Bitcoin miners run the world reserve capital network. Bitcoin holders own the world reserve capital. If you want a prescription for prosperity in the 21st century, there's no better prescription than to own the world's reserve capital, run the world's reserve capital network, benefit from the growth of the world's reserve capital asset. And the logic from the United States point of view is, we already run the world reserve currency, now we'll own the world's reserve capital network. If people ever recapitalize their sovereign debt with Bitcoin, it will be a benefit to the American people, the American corporations, the American way of life, the American ideology, and it's a way out. Like we talked about, Natalie, we've talked about the despair of the working class that can't get ahead, and the hope that Bitcoin brings to the working class. An individual or family can buy Bitcoin. Oftentimes, we don't really empathize with the despair of a corporation or the despair of a bank. Sometimes we don't really empathize with them. But what about the despair of a bank which is capitalized on a collapsing asset capital? What about the despair of a corporation? 1% of the companies in the S&P 500 make all the money. The others work hard. When I found Bitcoin, I was in despair. I had worked for a decade. I had spent 20,000 man years attempting to do everything under the sun. I could not get ahead.
Right.
And I was the same me. I wasn't stupid, right? You look at me and say, well, this is Michael Saylor, worked as hard as he could for a decade and could not get ahead, right? And the most pernicious thing you can do to someone is you make them think that they're just not smart enough, and the reason they're failing is because they're not smart and they don't work hard enough. And then you realize, no, the system is rigged against you. So what does this mean? What does the strategic Bitcoin reserve mean? It means that Bitcoin is hope for the people, but it means that once the United States embraces Bitcoin as the world's reserve capital network and it builds that strategic Bitcoin reserve, the path is open for corporations in the United States to recapitalize on Bitcoin. And the path is open for banks to recapitalize on Bitcoin. And now corporations don't have to die. Banks don't have to die. Institutions are already off the hook. Individuals are already off the hook. For an endowment and for a family and for a private company, it's your choice if you choose the asset which is going up 60% a year or the asset which is going down 6% a year. That's your choice. But it was never a choice for the banks in the US. It was never a choice for operating companies in the US. And so what Senator Lummis is doing is really much more profound than we're going to buy some Bitcoin. What she is doing is she is laying the ethical, economic, technical foundation to revitalize the banking system in the US and in the world, all the public companies in the US and then the world, all of the institutions. And she's spreading the American way of life, the American ideology. And what will first happen is America will do it, but eventually every other country in the world, in Europe, in South America, in the Middle East, they will all look at what we're doing and they will follow us in the same way that, when we started building airports and airplanes, they followed us. And when we started embracing electricity, they followed us. And when John D. Rockefeller started, creating gasoline and kerosene, the world wanted to buy it. And the world wanted to buy Henry Ford's automobiles. They're going to want Bitcoin, and they're going to want digital capital. And this is really, it's a pivotal moment in the history of the world. I mean, the Trump, Vance, Musk movement, when we made this choice, are we going to embrace technology and Starlink and electric vehicles and entrepreneurship? Are we going to give the people their freedom back? Are we going to embrace innovation? Right? That choice that took place on Tuesday, November 5th, that catapulted us into a whole new world of possibilities, and that made the strategic Bitcoin reserve possible, and that made the recapitalization of the world on sound economic, ethical, and engineering principles possible. And that's why it's been such a good week, Natalie.
No, it has been. I want to pull on that thread of this separation that you're making about Bitcoin being digital capital versus digital currency. How do you envision Bitcoin actually assimilating with all these other fiat currencies, including the dollar? Why do we need 160 different currencies? I mean, technically, Bitcoin allows you to facilitate these types of transactions in a borderless 24/7 way.
I think if you look at the world today, there's $900 trillion or more of wealth in the world. A lot of that wealth is invested in real estate. A lot of that wealth is invested in equity. A lot of that wealth is invested in gold, in art. A lot of that wealth is in currencies. A lot of that wealth is in bonds, corporate bonds, governmental bonds, and then a lot of that wealth is in various other forms of derivatives. The compelling use case, the most important use case in the world, the most valuable thing in the world is just long-term capital, long-term store of value. That's worth half of all that. $450 trillion worth of long-term capital, right? When people struggle with what's the use case of Bitcoin or what's the use case of anything, well, the irony is they're staring right at it. It's like to be rich and stay rich forever. It's what everybody wants. It's what every kid wants. Every 3-year-old wants this. There's no one that ever lived in the history of the world that didn't want more money, more power, right? They wanted wealth and prosperity. So that's worth $450 trillion. Capital. That is the compelling thing. Now, what is currency? Well, currency is the medium of exchange. It's what I swap in order to get my gasoline, or in order to buy a donut, in order to pay the rent. And it's the high frequency liquid money, liquid stable high frequency money. It allows 400 million companies to have a price list with 100 items on it. So you've got billions and billions and billions of prices in a certain, in a certain currency, and we need to swap that back and forth at high frequency. Well, how valuable is that? I don't know, 10 trillion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 trillion? Not 450 trillion. A very simple use case, or a simple acid test is, Jeff Bezos, worth 200 billion. How much of the 200 billion is invested in US dollars? Pure dollars in a savings account or a checking account right now? What? 1%? You think he's got $2 billion cash? No. He probably doesn't, Bernard Arnault, worth 180 billion. How many dollars or euros do you think Bernard Arnault has right now right? Not even 1%. So if the 450 trillion is the wealth, right? That is assets held for capital preservation. The other 400 trillion or 450 trillion, assets held for utility. I have this house, so we can have this interview. I like the backyard. I like the pool. I could park a yacht in the backyard. I like it.
Can't
Utility.
live in a Bitcoin.
The yacht is a utility. The jet is a utility. The chair is a utility. The art is utility value. It's okay. You own the sports team because you want to go sit courtside and root for the team, right? There are a lot of you own Apple because you want to root for Apple and you want dividends maybe. So you own a bakery because you like the idea of creating cool things with the bakery. You own the restaurant because you love the restaurant business. You own a resort in Hawaii because you want to invite your friends to the resort in Hawaii. There's a lot of things in the world that are held for their utility. You should own a bond because you want to clip the coupons. You want fixed income in a secure currency. In a world without digital capital, without perfected capital, then we have to monetize the real estate, monetize the bond, monetize the stock, monetize the art, monetize, everything under the sun. What does that mean? It means that you pay twice as much as it's worth. You pay 50 times earnings, but the company's only worth 10 times earnings, but you pay 50 times. Why? I know wealthy people, they own 16 estates on the Eastern Shore, and they live in 2 of them. Like, why do they buy them? They land banking. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Well, the guy makes a lot of money every year, and he doesn't want to put it in a savings account, so he goes and he just buys a cool piece of property, and he buys another one. Well, okay, it sounds good, but here's the problem. The guy buys up the beautiful pieces of property, and so you can't afford it. And if the rich guy wasn't buying up all the beautiful houses, they would cost half as much. And you could live in a beautiful house. So here's what happens. Some rich dude has 27 houses that are empty. You don't have a beautiful house. You have a family. Your kids, your dog could use the beautiful house. The rich dude doesn't even want the house. He just wants a long-term capital preservation strategy. Right? And so that's a perverse incentive and a distorted economy. That's broken. That's broken money. That's because the rich dude is using an estate on the Eastern Shore of Maryland as a piggy bank. Yep. Huh? But the estate doesn't get renovated. The house is falling down. There's a beautiful pool on the water, and you could have a great family picnic there every Sunday, but it's not going to happen because the rich dude has 16 other houses. He just bought that house because he thought it was a good investment. Okay, that's wrong, right? So when you come back and you look at this, currency's not worth that much. This is the big idea. Everybody's scrambling over digital currency, blah, blah. I want Bitcoin to be a currency. It's not worth much. Right? If I said to the richest guy in the world, Jeff Bezos, or Elon Musk now, if I said, hey, I have this little token, and you can use it to buy coffee, and you don't have to pay 2%, to Visa. You can pay 1 Satoshi. How much of it you want to buy? I'm like, I don't know. I guess I can buy 0.0001% of my wealth. I would invest in that. Like, I don't need that. It's no problem for me. If I said, oh, I have digital capital, it's returning 4 times the S&P index and twice the Magnificent Seven. It's going to generate 60% return. By the way, it's growing 3 times as fast as your company. How much of that do you want to buy?
All of it.
All of it. All of it. Okay, so the richest guy in the world wants to buy $100 billion of Bitcoin. The richest guy in the world wants to buy, I'll buy like $5,000 of your digital token just to mollify you, right? To patronize you. So the point is, digital currency is not really worth that much. I mean, as an investment. It's not that it's a bad business, right? The world will run better if the $1 trillion, and it sounds like a lot of money, $1 trillion, if 1 trillion, $10 trillion goes from analog money in the banking system to digital money, and you move it like Tether at the speed of light, oh, the world will work better. It'll be great for a lot of things, but at the end of the day, I don't really think it's as valuable as the equity of the AI company that thinks everything all the time 1 billion times faster and 1 billion times better than us. I don't think it's as better as Tesla if Tesla creates 8 billion robots that then make more robots, right? I think there are a lot of other ideas, right? Making currency move at the speed of light's a good idea. But, having robots do everything for us and everybody having a genius Jarvis that does everything 1 billion times faster and better than they would do it, I think those are good ideas. But obviously, I think the best idea is Bitcoin. The best idea is long-term capital preservation for the civilization, money that lasts forever, right? Immortal, indestructible economic energy is the best idea. And so you ask, how does this all fit together? Well, what's going to happen is Bitcoin is going to grow some amount. Right now it's growing 50 to 60% a year. It's going to grow 50 to 60% a year, and gradually it will decelerate to the rate of double the S&P index. It'll grow 20% a year, 25% of the S&P is growing 10. And when that happens, it'll be 7, right now my forecast in July was it'll be 7% of the world's capital. It'll grow 29% a year, ARR for 21 years. It'll go to 13 million a coin by the year 2045. Probably you would be more bullish today after November 5th. I think that the political winds are actually more favorable today. But when Bitcoin does that, there's still going to be the Tesla, Elon thinks Tesla will be worth $30 trillion. I don't know that he's wrong. I mean, I wouldn't bet against him. Everybody's bet against him is lost, right? Right? Elon's winning. They're all losing, right? And so
he has some Bitcoin.
And he's going to win with Bitcoin, and that's going to make him a fortune too. So I think equity is going to grow. I think we're going to tokenize other assets. I think the digital assets industry is going to grow. I think that digital currency will grow. I think that we'll probably recapitalize a lot of the world on Bitcoin instead of bonds. But I think there'll still be bonds. I think there'll still be bonds. There'll still be equity. There'll still be real estate. There'll still be art. I think that gold will be progressively demonetized, and at some point, gold will just be viewed like silver. I mean, silver is, I'm wearing a silver belt. Imagine this is a gold belt buckle. I can afford this. I can't quite afford a solid gold belt buckle. I couldn't afford the solid gold belt buckle before Bitcoin. Maybe I could now.
I'm sure you could.
But the point is, I wouldn't buy it now because it's going to devalue until it's worth silver at some point. Because at the end of the day, it's just a little bit better than silver. And ultimately, it's going to be the Bitcoin belt buckle you're going to want.
It's time for a quick break to hear these messages from my partners who make this podcast possible.
First up, Casa. It is so easy to set up your Bitcoin 3-key self-custody with Casa that I can show you pretty much the whole process in just 30 seconds. You're watching it right now. I recently switched to Casa for multi-sig collaborative custody and inheritance planning because of their enhanced non-KYC required privacy and the ease of this mobile app. Make sure to watch the tutorials and get your Casa plan for 10% off at casa.io/Natalie. Next up, Speed Lightning Wallet, one of the fastest growing Bitcoin wallets out there. Speed is a secure, low-cost way to send and receive Bitcoin and stablecoins instantly. The app is super simple to use and customers love it. Download Speed using the QR code on the screen or the link in my show notes. Use promo code COINSTORIES10 to get 5,000 free sats. Next up, Coinkite. You know how much I believe in self-custody, and when it comes to cold storage wallets, none are better than the Cold Card. You can verify the source code, it's ultra secure, and it's easy to use even if you're a beginner. Head to their site in my show notes and get a 5% discount with promo code COINSTORIES. And finally, are you ready to take control of your wealth? The Bitcoin Way is here to empower you. Learn how to take full self-custody and eliminate all counterparty risk. Set up your node and become the master of your own transactions and enjoy true autonomy. And upgrade your cybersecurity and protect your online privacy like I did. The Bitcoin Way specializes in personalized one-on-one training to help you become fully self-sovereign. Schedule a free consultation today. Okay, well, Michael, you are known for saying there is no second best, but I just saw a presentation that you gave where in the title you had crypto renaissance. I'm getting the sense that your views on the broader crypto industry are changing, and you mentioned there will be other digital currencies, the tokenization of assets. Can you clarify your views and your forecast on this whole space?
Yes, I think if you had asked me before November 5th what's going to happen, I would say in the event of a blue wave, Bitcoin's going to grind up against resistance and continue to grow. Despite a not progressive regime, but it's going to continue to grow because it's unstoppable. And I would have said the digital assets industry is going to continue to shrink and continue to decay in the event of a blue wave. So there was a bifurcation, Bitcoin going up 20 or 30% a year and digital assets falling 20% or 30% a year in the event of a blue wave. In the event of a red wave, I would say Bitcoin is going to blast up, not grind up, but blast up. It's going to power up much faster because now you have a pro-Bitcoin president, a pro-Bitcoin Congress, pro-Bitcoin legislation. We'll have pro-Bitcoin banks. We're going to have pro-Bitcoin institutions. We're going to have pro-Bitcoin mining, etc. So I think that Bitcoin goes from that powering up at 20% to blasting up much faster than that. And I think that the digital assets industry goes from decaying 20% now to blasting up and growing, because the digital assets industry, it can't really prosper in the absence of a digital assets framework, which meets 3 criteria. It needs to be ethically sound. It needs to be economically sound, right? And engineeringly sound, technically sound. It needs to be sound technically, physically sound. So a technical, ethical, economic framework in order to build an entire digital assets industry. So there's no enthusiasm for putting that forward in the previous administration. Now there is enthusiasm, and we'll get one. We've got a promise that we will get a digital assets framework. And I think within that framework, there's clearly a lot of value to be created. If you create digital securities, then what that would mean is you could tokenize a share of Apple stock and you could trade it on a digital exchange on Saturday. And you could even tokenize the Apple stock and you could take self-custody of your Apple shares on your iPhone. And if you can have your photos on an iPhone and your books on your iPhone, and if you can have your files on an iPhone, and if you can have your Bitcoin on an iPhone, why can't you have your Apple stock on an iPhone? So I think that a digital securities framework is very compelling. People want to trade on the weekends. They want to trade on the evenings. They want to, you know, what happens right now? There's like one company that can trade Apple stock. What happens when there's 1,500 companies that can trade Apple stock? What happens when 8 billion people or 6 billion people with smartphones? What happens when people with Android phones can custody Apple stock, right? It's not a complicated idea. Is it technically possible? Sure it is, with modern cryptography. That we solved the problem with Bitcoin, right? And modern cryptography has solved the problem. It's just there's no legal, ethical, technical, agreed upon technical protocol to do it. So I think digital securities are very powerful, and you could see first billions, then trillions, tens of trillions of dollars of analog securities become tokenized and become digital. And I don't have an ethical problem with it. For example, I wouldn't recommend that you invest in Apple or Amazon or Facebook or Google over Bitcoin. The truth is, I wouldn't recommend Bitcoin over my own stock. I would recommend it over anybody else's stock. It's Bitcoin, right? I mean, so I wouldn't really recommend any of 50,000 public companies. But I would say the world's a better place if they all tokenize, if they're all digital, right? I mean, it's pretty clear if on Sunday afternoon you have the option to buy, sell, trade, or transfer your stock, you're empowered. And that's good for the world. And that's good for the people. I think if you move to, say, digital currencies, I consider a Tether or a Circle, a stable coin, a digital currency. I think that, that a clear regulatory framework where a corporation can issue them, back them by US dollars or US dollar equivalents like short-term treasury bills. I think if you can do that, that's a good thing for the world. If Tether's going to do it, we should have Tether relocate to the United States, give them a license in the US and let them do it. And I also think, though, you ought to let JP Morgan do it and Goldman Sachs do it. And I think you ought to let Circle do it. I think there should be a competition in the market. And if it turns out that Tether and Circle are better than JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, then I think Tether and Circle should issue all the digital currency in the world. If you're in the United States, you just want, you don't want $150 billion of currency. You want $15 trillion worth of US digital currency to be circulating. So I think that that's good for the world, good for the dollar, right? Because you said, well, how does Bitcoin deal with 150 other currencies? Or maybe there's 120. Well, the dirty secret is they're all pegged to the dollar, except for the failing ones. There's only two types of currencies in the world. Well, there's three types of currencies in the world, Natalie, if you break it all down. There's currencies that are explicitly pegged to the dollar, right? Mm-hmm. The DRAM, explicitly pegged to the dollar. The CNY, explicitly pegged to the dollar. Right? There's a lot of those currencies where they literally, so China, they keep it exactly pegged to the dollar. It's just the US dollar. Then there's another set of currencies that quote unquote float, and they do this, yep, plus or minus 5%. Yep. They're nominally pegged to the dollar, right? The Swiss franc, the euro, all of these, they're not really floating. They're just enough of a floating to make it interesting, but as soon as they get too strong or too weak, the monetary authorities move to bring them back into parity with the dollar. Nobody really wants them to move. So they're on the dollar standard as well. And then there's a third set of currencies that don't bother to be pegged to the dollar. They would be the Naira, the Venezuelan Bolivar, right? There's whatever they use in Cuba, right? And the Lebanese pound, the Turkish lira, they all fall in the category of collapsing, failing. So you pretty much got every currency that sort of works is pegged to the dollar, and every other currency is failing, and so they don't work. So how does Bitcoin sit next to them? It's not competing with the dollar. What's going to happen is If the US licenses digital currency and we go from 150 billion in stablecoin to 1.5 trillion to 15 trillion, it just means there's going to be a demand for $15 trillion of US sovereign debt that's going to be bought by the digital currency companies, which is why, of course, you would just put them in the US, have them audited by, if we dropped the war on crypto, auditors would audit the stablecoin companies. They could do business with the banks. They could relocate to the US. They would buy up $10 trillion worth of US sovereign debt, and they would compete with US banks, and may the better company win, and the winners would be the American people, the world, right? Market economics and the future, right? You know, that's the winner. Who's the losers, Natalie? The loser would be every crappy, weak currency in the world, every mismanaged, every regime that's managed less efficiently than the United States. You know, and I know we're oftentimes critical at home, but the truth of the matter is everywhere else is worse. I mean, Sri Lanka is worse. China is worse. Russia is worse. Everywhere in South America, it's worse. Venezuela, you think Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela, Lebanon, war zones, Afghanistan, every single, tell me the country in Africa which has managed better than the US. Name the one. I give you the entire continent, right? It's kind of difficult to find even one country on earth. You're like, oh, I think the Singaporeans do a good job. Okay, you might find a city-state, one little city that sort of on some dimension is doing as well or better. But for the most part, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and there's 7.7 billion people that live in a place which is less, that's managed much less intelligently than the United States. So the losers are the authoritarians and the authorities that wish to impose a fiat currency on the 7.7 billion people that is more inflationary than the dollar. And while they're doing it, they will impose a fiat capital asset on the same 7 billion people. So, you know, we say, well, everybody should just use Bitcoin. Well, they should use Bitcoin, but the truth of the matter is, if you were an operating business in Argentina for the past 20 years, and you had 100 million pesos, if you had been able to swap it for $100 million on a digital currency network, you would still be rich. And if you had been stuck in the peso, you would have been devalued 1,000 to 1, and you would be impoverished. And if you had bought Bitcoin, well, yeah, you would be like the richest person in the world, right? I mean, if you had bought $100 million of Bitcoin 20 years ago, I mean, you couldn't, but 10 years ago, yeah, you would be richer than Elon Musk. But the point is, and this is what I learned in my life, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And the message of the crypto renaissance to the Bitcoiners would be, yeah, Bitcoin is like a perfect solution. But the Argentinians didn't need the perfect solution. If they'd all picked the perfect solution, they'd be richer than Elon Musk and Bernard Arnault and Jeff Bezos right now. They didn't need that. They just needed a solution that was better than an awful one. And so in this particular case, a digital currency that spreads to the entire world, that's embraced by the world, would actually provide American prosperity to people in Africa, Asia, South America, ASEAN, Europe, and it would be I'm going to call it a gateway drug, right, to Bitcoin, right? I think that when you're in Nigeria, going to Tether, going to a digital currency that's backed by the US dollar is the obvious step. And after you get there, the next step would be go to digital capital, which is Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin it's not really competing with the currencies. The US dollar is going to actually replace the weak, defective, toxic currencies. You know, people think, well, the US bonds, they're being attacked by Bitcoin. Well, let me turn it around. If we release digital currency, the digital currency is going to go to everywhere in the world, and U.S. bonds are going to capitalize all those other countries. And I wouldn't choose U.S. bonds to capitalize MicroStrategy, but if you were operating a business in Afghanistan or Lebanon or Argentina or Nigeria and you capitalize on U.S. bonds, you would be rich. And so don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think digital currency is going to spread American values and spread Bitcoin values, eventually. And it's a good thing, and it ought to be headquartered in America. And so that's number two. I got digital securities, digital currency. And the last observation is just, the world's better if we had digital tokens. If there's an ethically sound, economically sound, technically sound way to issue them. There's nothing wrong with Joe Rogan issuing Rogan token or Katy Perry issuing Katy Perry coin if it was fair and equitable, if he didn't lie, cheat, and steal, right? And if there's some utility, if you give someone digital utility, or if you just take the idea of, if I run a $5 million a year business, how do I sell securities to the public to raise $3 million? If the SEC makes you spend $50 million on lawyers and accountants in order to protect people that want to put $2 million at risk, it's like you can't buy a $50 million insurance policy to take a $2 million risk. And so what we need is a digital regime where I can do things 1 million times faster, 1 million times cheaper. And if I can do it 1 million times faster and cheaper, then I can deliver the promise of either digital securities or digital tokens to 400 million businesses instead of 4,000. And so, I do think after the red wave, there's a crypto renaissance that's coming, and I think the crypto renaissance is going to spark massive capital formation, and we're going to not have, there's 4,000 public companies, and there's like 40 everybody talks about. I mean, how many of the Russell 2000 do you trade? It's like I turn on CNBC, and it's like NVIDIA, Apple, Meta, NVIDIA, Tesla, NVIDIA, Apple, Meta, Microsoft. And it's like, well, what about the other 99.9%? And so what you realize is we have an antiquated oligopoly. We have an antiquated structure based on 20th century ideas. It's time for us to move into the 21st century. It's time for us to do things smarter, faster, stronger. It's time for us to serve the 8 billion people that are trying to make a life for themselves through the 400 million companies. And we should hold out the promise of technology. And the government's role, it isn't to tell you no. It isn't to sue you when you try to do something aspirational. The government's role is to provide an ethically sound, technically sound, economically sound way out of poverty. I mean, it could be as simple as, here are the asset classes. Don't lie, cheat, or steal, and you'll be fine. If you lie, cheat, or steal, we'll sue you. And if you actually want to be fair and equitable and just, fill out this form, give people this information, publish this, and then go take your risk. And if someone wants to take the risk with you, fine, let them do it. And sure, 99% of these ideas will fail in the market, but 1% will succeed. And the 1% that succeed will be SpaceX or Tesla or Apple or Edison Electric or Ford Motor Company or Standard Oil. And that's how we're going to power the civilization forward.
So if I could summarize everything you just said, it looks like we're witnessing the digitization of fiat currencies and eventually the tokenization of real-world assets to empower the individual through a set of digital solutions, with Bitcoin being really the pristine collateral and the deep store of value. And all of this will contribute through free enterprise to a more thriving global economy. Do I have everything you said kind of summarized?
I think so. I think it's not just empowering the individual, it's also empowering corporations. I mean, when two individuals get together and decide to solve a problem as a team, you just created a company. Mm-hmm. And when 5 individuals, right, you've got a business. So I think empowering individuals, teams of individuals, corporations, institutions, and You know, and when 10 individuals get together and they decide to run, and one of them's going to run for mayor, and they get elected, you've just created a government. And we just saw a change of a government. So I think this is all about better living through technology and empowering individuals, families, corporations, and governments to create a better future for all of us.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about MicroStrategy for a moment because it has pretty much outperformed everything. It's outperformed every stock in the S&P 500. It's dominated over the last 4 years. Why have we seen so few companies follow in your footsteps?
I think in 2020, as I told you, after 10 years of doing I tried to buy the stock back. I spent hundreds of millions on sales and marketing. I rebuilt every system in the company from the ground up. We rebuilt all the products again. A third time, I had the most brilliant people working for me. And after I tried every possible conventional technique and nothing had worked, COVID hit, lockdown hit. The stock was cut in half again. And after the stock was cut in half, and you know, we had a $500 million company worth $250 million. And after the stock was cut in half, the only thing we had left was $500 million of cash. And then Jerome Powell said, well, we're going to set the interest rate on the cash at 0 and keep it there for 4 years. And I was like, well, and it's illegal to go to your office. And after you've been beat to death, you know, and to add insult to injury, we're under home arrest. Jerome Powell says our cash is worthless and he's going to keep it worthless forever. The stock has crashed. All the big tech companies are hiring away all my employees. Then now they just have to repat their browser and they'll go work for Google and Facebook and Amazon. Like, why'd you leave? Well, I'm getting stock options. Well, our stock is worthless. Our options are worthless. You know, after all that, to add insult to injury, when the Fed dropped interest rates to 0, everybody owning the empty real estate got rich. The offices are empty. No one's using the office space, but the value of the office buildings doubled. I'm not allowed to even go to the office, but the guy that owns the office, I have to pay the rent. The guy that owns the office just had the value of his real estate double. And then all those companies on Wall Street, you know, their stocks doubled. And I looked at the world and I said, there's just a major disconnect. There's Main Street. If you work for a living, if you own a yoga salon or you run a restaurant or a bar, you operate a cruise line or you go knock on doors or you do something or you fly aircraft, you take risk. You're not allowed to work. Your company's shut down and you're bankrupt. And it's your fault. And if you try to work, you're an enemy of the people. You want to go to work, you're going to kill grandma. Okay? So that's like, okay, well, the entire system is basically stacked, right? It's stacked to oppress, crush, suck the soul out of Main Street, and you're the enemy. It's your fault. And then on the other hand, Wall Street, their stocks all double. They all got rich. They're the best year of their life. And this is the perversity. By the late summer of 2020, if you owned a $2 billion hedge fund, you had $4 billion, you actually got a $200 million payout. You're on a floaty in your pool in the Hamptons. Everyone's telling you how smart you are. You're a genius. You did no work. You just got rich because the interest rates went from 350 basis points to 0 and all the assets doubled. And so it was in that time I looked at it and I said, this is really effed up, right? This is really distorted. These are distorted. The good people are destroyed and the people doing nothing are enriched. And it kind of made me angry. So somewhere between despair, frustration, anger, irritation. And then the last point is we had nothing to lose. Right? Why did we do it? Because we tried everything else. We had nothing to lose. And I had all of these things in front of me, and I said, well, it's pretty obvious if the system is rigged in favor of the property owners against the working class, then I had a working class company. I said, I'm either going to sit here and play the game the way the system is, hold my cash at zero and lose 10 or, I mean, at that point, the effective inflation rate was 20%. We were going to lose $100 million a year. I was going to basically get beat to zero. If we could either work ourselves to death and be beat to zero, or we could take the money, right, and revolt against the system. And it's like switch to the Bitcoin standard. So I thought, we have nothing to lose, everything to gain. We have no chance of winning in the old system. It's not clear to me that the new system will be successful, but I know the old system is a certain death.
Right.
So there's a point at which the ship is sinking. You're either going to get in the lifeboat that have you ever been in the lifeboat that you get in when the ship is sinking? The answer is generally no, right? The percentage of people that are first-time lifeboat users is like 99.9% normally. Maybe there's one crew member that's been in a lifeboat, but probably not.
But so why haven't other companies followed suit more?
Because they were looking at a certain death. Because the other companies, you have to get to the point where you're looking over the edge of the abyss and you realize you're looking at a quick death or a slow death or take a risk. Okay? And I suppose the equivalent, when other companies get to this point, there's a conventional and there's an unconventional exit, Natalie. The conventional exit is sell the company, or go private, an LBO. So out of 100 competitors of mine over the course of 30 years, 99 of them sold themselves. So normally the way that people basically exit, they even call them exits for entrepreneurs. I had a lot of exit. It means they got to the point where they couldn't grow the company anymore, so they sold it. So you either sell the company, or you go private, which is the same as selling the company to private investors, or you shut down you go bankrupt, right? But it's more often you just sell the company. So I would say a lot of companies did go bankrupt after COVID. A lot failed. A lot sold themselves, right? And the unconventional approach is you merge with Bitcoin, right? You invert yourself and you adopt a Bitcoin standard. Now, the impediments to doing it are, you had to understand Bitcoin, so it takes 100 hours. And you have to know enough to know, and I suppose you still have to have hope. Because, my choice was sell the company for $18 a share, which would be when we had like $7 a share in cash. So sell the company for whatever, $10 a share effectively, and give up, retire, and declare victory. That was my choice. Or take a risk, right? Whatever, the company's $300 and something a share now. So it worked out well for my employees and my shareholders that we didn't give up. But most people, I think they get to the point in their life where they just give up. Because, isn't that what most people do? They just they take the conventional way out, they retire, like, I can't do anything more, so I'm just going to throw in the towel.
I guess they lack hope, or they don't understand Bitcoin, or both.
I think it's the 4 years, a lot of people take their cues, they're not first principles thinkers, right? They take their cues from other authority figures. So 4 years ago, it wasn't clear that Bitcoin was an institutional asset. It wasn't clear as a digital commodity. What happened? Gary Gensler said it's a digital commodity. Gary Gensler said Satoshi did a good thing. The administration didn't ban it. BlackRock supported it. Trump said, don't sell it. So and FASB, the accounting organization, said, okay, now you can market at fair value. So if it goes up, you have an investment gain. When it goes down, it's an investment loss. If you have $1 billion of it, you can say you have $1 billion of it. So the accounting got fixed. The regulatory treatment got fixed. The political environment got fixed. One could argue, though, these things really didn't really get fixed, or they won't be truly fixed until 2025, right? When Trump is president, January 20th, now you have a president that says don't sell your Bitcoin, Now you have an end to the war on crypto. Now you have an end to the war, the hostile approach toward Bitcoin. Now you have a new head of the SEC that doesn't just say, I will do it under protest, but it's a good thing. And then fair value accounting becomes normal. If we get the repeal of SAB 121 and you get the first bank or two banks that support Bitcoin, then you can say, okay, the banking system accepted it, the accounting system accepted it, the regulators accepted it, the administration accepted it, the House, the Senate accepted it. Now a lot of people that they don't really think for themselves, or maybe they just fall in, it might be too harsh, it might be more to say, they just want to be part of the crowd or the late majority, or I want to basically wait until all the other people have taken the risk. When all my smart rich friends have an iPhone, I'll buy an iPhone. When my smart rich friends have a stereo playing piano, I'll buy a piano that plays music for itself. When my smart rich friends have a jet, I'll buy a jet. You know, so they're going to wait for their smart rich friends that they look up to do it, and then they will follow. Yeah. And I think that in August of 2020, Natalie, when I tweeted we bought 250 million of Bitcoin, it didn't occur to me that no one else in the history of the crypto industry had ever announced that they bought $250 million of Bitcoin. It didn't occur to me that no one ever announced they bought 250 million of anything, right? And it didn't occur to me that no one ever did privately, right? So the most likely situation then, looking back ex post facto in hindsight, is when we announced we'd done it, nobody in the history of the world had ever invested $250 million in a crypto asset. No one had ever announced it, right? No one ever done it. And so what happened next, of course, is now we've invested more than 10 billion. And now here's the most important insight. Now we've invested more than 10 million. We know that smart people have invested more than 850 billion. We know that now. But we also know, even after the 4 years, even after 40 Bitcoin buys, even after I've said, I buy, oh, I'm going to buy 42 billion more. Even after that, nobody has ever put out a press release or a tweet saying they bought $250 million of any other crypto asset. So there is no second best. It's like there's one crypto asset that people buy that's money. Everything else is a speculation. And I have no problem with speculation if you can do it in an ethically sound, fair fashion. If you're not cheating somebody, then I don't have a problem with gambling. I don't have a problem with speculation. And the truth is, I think there's a place to launch tokens and digital securities and the like that are actually constructive and good for the civilization. And I think we'll see it going forward. But what we know today is Bitcoin was something that was a solution in 2020. In 2025, 2025 is year one of institutional adoption. And the long-winded answer to the question, why hasn't someone else done it, is institutions want all of the risk to be taken out of the equation, and that's what we've been doing for the past 4 years. And I think that with the Trump administration and a favorable set of regulators, we will sometime by the end of 2025 have given people, you know, the planks that they need for massive institutional adoption.
Yeah, I mean, you've been standing on the Bitcoin bridge, letting everyone know it's safe, and pretty soon they're all going to come across it. Let's talk about that $42 billion raise, because half of it was the largest ATM equity offering in the history of capital markets. So tell me, what led to this decision, that amount, and how quickly can you deploy that capital? Well, you want to get Bitcoin as quickly as possible, right?
Yeah, you can't buy Bitcoin fast enough.
Exactly.
We initially started, you know, our initial Bitcoin purchase was out of desperation. It's like, I just don't know what else to do anymore. This is my last idea, but I have nothing to lose and I'm irritated, right? And so we're going to do this. And then it became opportunistic our stock tripled and we could raise $650 million for 70 basis points, 75, effectively free money. I thought, okay, well, we'll buy Bitcoin with that. And then our stock rallied again and we raised $1 billion for free. And I thought, well, okay, now this is very opportunistic. Someone wants to give you $1 billion for a zero coupon to invest in something you believe in, you would take it. And then at some point it became strategic. We're just going to keep doing this. And we can do it with occasionally different types of bonds and equity and the like. And then 2024 came along and the question was, what is MicroStrategy's role? And some people thought, well, it's better to invest in Bitcoin miners or it's better to invest in Bitcoin ETFs. And MicroStrategy is just a holding company. And between the beginning of 2024 and the end, what we realized is, well, the Bitcoin miners have a business which is decaying. The protocol is decreasing their productivity 18% a year in Bitcoin terms because of the halving. And then the hash rate's exploding, which is decreasing their productivity, another factor, 20 or 30% a year because of the hash rate increase. So if you're an institutional investor and you like Bitcoin exposure, that's a big question mark. Whereas MicroStrategy was like a Bitcoin miner, but our productivity is decreasing 0% a year. And our Bitcoin is increasing 50% a year. So what the investors wanted was they wanted Bitcoin exposure with volatility and no headwind. And so MicroStrategy represented the volatility, more liquidity, no headwind, right? And the result is a lot of money rotated out of Bitcoin miners into MicroStrategy as we approached the halving. And we got this boost. And then when we got this boost, our premium to net assets expanded. And then because our volatility was high, we were able to go to the convertible bond market and we sold a convertible bond. And then Bitcoin exploded and we sold another convertible bond a week later. We did 800 million, then we did another 600 million. And then a quarter later, we did another 800 million. And then a quarter later, we realized, well, we could sell $1 billion of equity at a 2 or 3 times a massive multiple to our underlying asset value. So we could sell $1 billion of equity and we could capture a $600 million gain in a few weeks. So we did that. And then we went back to the convertible bond market because the bond holders wanted another bond. So we sold that and we upside it. It was $1 billion bond at 80 basis points. And once we got through all of that, what we realized was our real compelling business opportunity is as a Bitcoin treasury company. What we're offering is securities backed by Bitcoin. The bond holders want low risk Bitcoin. The equity holders want high performance Bitcoin. Some people want high voltage Bitcoin. Some people want low voltage Bitcoin. The ETFs are offering raw Bitcoin, raw wrapped Bitcoin. So you're getting 55 or 60 volatility and 60 ARR, and that's raw. And MicroStrategy stock was offering you double that, or 90 or even 100, sometimes 120 vol and 100 to 120 ARR. So you're getting high, levered, high voltage Bitcoin. And who wants that? Bitcoin maxis. The only thing that's better than Bitcoin is more Bitcoin. Double Bitcoin. If you like the return of Bitcoin, how do I get double the return of Bitcoin? I know Bitcoin's going to go up 50% a year. I want 100. Why don't you want 100% a year if you can get 50% a year? Well, the answer is if you get 100%, if you want double, you're the degenerate and you're doing 2x leverage on Binance or FTX, you might get forced liquidated on a Saturday night. So you want 2x, but you want it with intelligent leverage. So intelligent leverage is I borrow the money for 5 years and I pay 0% interest and I don't pledge any Bitcoin as collateral, so there's no mark to market, so I never get liquidated. There's no margin call. So if you could start a company and you could borrow $1 billion for free and buy Bitcoin, would you start a company, borrow $1 billion and buy Bitcoin?
Yeah.
And would you outperform someone else that took their own piggy bank and bought Bitcoin? Yeah. So it's a simple idea, but people sometimes struggle with that idea, which is a corporation that has access to the capital markets can get very, very cheap capital under good terms. So what we realized was there's a lot of people that want to, by the way, a lot of people want to borrow, they want to loan me that money. Like, because the convertible arbitrageurs, they can't buy Bitcoin and they can't even buy the equity. They actually want to buy the bond, short the equity, so sell the equity, buy the bond, capture and extract the premium. And what they think is, well, I am buying a $50 million bond and making $6 million risk-free in 1 week. And so, I mean, making $6 million in a week on one trade in 3 hours work. Good business, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's another group of people that are long bond holders. They bought the $50 million bond 2 months ago, and the bond doubled in price, and they made $50 million in 2 months with no risk. Okay, so hold on, right? What's going on? The ARBs did a double hedge. The bond is already 20x over collateralized, right? Because you're selling a bond that's like got 10x more Bitcoin, but 20x more stock. So if Bitcoin goes from 80,000 to 4,000, you're still getting paid back on the bond. It was already almost risk-free. Not quite risk-free, but let's say extremely low risk. I mean, the face value of the bond might change a little bit, but the odds that you're going to get paid back your principal are very high. So the ARB doesn't want to take risk for a day. The guy that does the convertible ARB, they don't even want to take risk for an hour, right? So their risk tolerance, their time preference, right, is I can take 2% risk for 1 day, and that's what I want to do. That's my thing. And there's hundreds of billions of dollars of capital. They want to do that thing. So we give them that thing to do. The bondholder, like, I can take a little bit of risk. Oh, these are the best performing bonds in the world. All the MicroStrategy bonds have doubled in value. Okay, how many other bonds? There is no corporate bond. There's no sovereign bond. There's no other type of bond or no preferred stock you can buy where you buy it for 100, it'll be worth 220 a few months later, right? So these are the best performing bonds in the world. It's like they've got the downside protection and they make money. So those people have fixed income funds. They have $100 trillion in those things. They have to buy that. And then they need a company like MicroStrategy that has a 100% Bitcoin treasury to create that bond. You see, you can't create a bond that doubles in value over 8 weeks if you're not 100% Bitcoin. If Berkshire Hathaway sold the same bond and they were backed by $100 billion of T-bills, well, okay, it's zero coupon, it's convertible, but it's like, what's the point? The bond has no option value in it. The T-bills have a vol of 5, and MicroStrategy has a vol of 100. Okay? So they've got no electricity in their bonds. So MicroStrategy is the leading issuer of Bitcoin-backed bonds in the world. And there's $300 trillion in the fixed income market that they can only buy bonds. But if you're going to buy bonds, wouldn't you like the lowest risk, highest performing bonds? MicroStrategy has the most interesting, highest performing, most liquid securities. Why? Because we're volatile, right? We got 100 volatility oscillator in the middle of the company. We oscillate at the bond volatility is 5. We're oscillating 20 times faster than treasury bills. We're oscillating 8 times harder than the S&P index. So we put this crypto reactor in the middle of the company. It makes the bonds very, very compelling. That allows the ARBs to do their thing, allows the fixed income guys to do their thing. But when we sell the bond, the spread for us is 70 to 80%, which means that 80% of the economics go immediately to our equity holders. And so the leverage in the bond for the Bitcoin maxis is extreme. We borrow $4.2 billion that's free, and we buy Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin goes up 50% a year, that means the 4.2 is going to double in 14 months or 18 months. So you've got 4 to 8 to 16 to 32. So there's $32 billion worth of leverage on the back end. We're only going to pay back the $4 billion of bonds, but we pay the $4 billion of bonds with $1.5 billion worth of equity at the time that we actually issue the bond. So the financial leverage is extreme, and the people that get that are the equity holders. So in essence, MicroStrategy is like a big crypto transformer, a Bitcoin transformer, high voltage Bitcoin, scary, high voltage Bitcoin comes in the front. And then on one side, we step it up to be extreme high voltage. That's how you outperform NVIDIA. You go, double Bitcoin or 1.5 Bitcoin. And then we give everybody low voltage Bitcoin, safe Bitcoin, low risk Bitcoin, low volatility Bitcoin on this side.
Right.
And the irony of it is everybody's getting exactly what they want. And the people that are buying our bonds or our equity, in some cases, they wouldn't buy the spot ETF. But in many cases, they couldn't. Not only would they not, people are like, well, why don't they? They can't, they won't, they don't wish to. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, I have 480 volt, 3-phase power on that dock. It'll power up a 500-ton yacht. You're not going to plug it into your blow dryer. Right? Has to go through it. If you go to the back of my property, I have a massive transformer, massive, to step down the power, right? There's a lot of value in giving people, what they can consume. And there's someone that makes a living converting that power into batteries and selling you a little battery pack so you can put it into your kids' toys. Mm-hmm. And you know what the markup is? It's like a factor of 1,000 markups. Like, the power would be much cheaper if you took it off the dock. And I'm like, yeah, well, if I plugged my little kids' toys into the dock, I would electrocute my kid. And so what we're doing is we're not electrocuting the traditional market. The traditional market can't handle Bitcoin.
Right.
It doesn't want 60% a year interest that's volatile. It wants 6% a year interest. By the way, that's only 10% of Bitcoin. If I give them the 6%, I get to keep the other 90%. And who gets that? My equity holders get it. And so MicroStrategy created this business model, maybe backed into it, discovered it. I won't tell you I understood it in 2020. I will tell you I understand it now. I'm a late bloomer, but a quick learner, right?
Right.
Learning.
So you can take the crude capital, you can refine it. There's really customers all along the spectrum, somewhat high vol, somewhat low vol. But ultimately, it goes to what you always say, the volatility, a feature, not a bug. Okay, well, we're running out of time, so I'm going to go to the lightning round because that was one of the favorite parts of one of our last interviews. So my first question for you is, what do you wish you knew more about?
Genetics,
Wow.
life. I think it's fascinating. You have a rock circling around the sun, and energy starts to hit the rock, right? Energy in terms of solar energy and entropy and chaos. And somehow out of that primordial ooze comes life, and it evolves. And I have just an endless fascination with how does a spider come out of the egg and know how to spin a web and hunt and live? There's no spider school. And I look at the web and I think that's incredible engineering. And the human can't do that, but the spider does. Or how do birds learn to fly? How do all these animals evolve? How did we evolve? How much information's in a strand of DNA, right? When you consider all of these consequences, I have 3 parrots, and Satoshi, Max, and Hope, right? 3 parrots, and I look at, and they're all different colors, right? A scarlet macaw, a blue and gold macaw, a Catalina. And they're glorious, beautiful colors, and you could stare at them all day long. And that's a color palette that was created by genetics and evolution 100 million years ago? And I'm like, well, and it's better than any artist. If I took an artist and said, I want you to paint me a beautiful tropical painting. You know, you go look at them, you're like, that's a color palette. You know, look at Max. That's so beautiful. That works. And you look at Holden, like, yeah, that works. That's on every cereal box. When I was growing up.
Yeah.
You know, and I look at Satoshi, and Satoshi's this glorious orange. You know, glorious orange colors, and every color that's beautiful that goes with orange. And I think that was all done through the wonder of genetics. And so I would just love to understand what's in the DNA that encodes, not just to create the color palette, to create the parrot. I'm going to take a little strand of DNA, and now it's going to come a parrot that flies, that's beautiful, that procreates, that prospers in an ecosystem. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. If I could ever figure it out, I think about it all the time.
I love that. What is the most misunderstood thing about you?
People think I'm a trader, and I'm not a trader. I'm an engineer. They're like, well, how's this trade going? Saylor's got a trade. Such and such made $1 billion. He's down $1 billion. He's up $1 billion. He's up $10 billion. He's made $13 billion on the trade. I'm making $2 billion on the trade. I'm not trading. I'm engineering. I'm engineering a better world. You know, I want Bitcoin to spread because I think it's going to engineer a better world for 8 billion people. I'm engineering a better company at MicroStrategy. It's, you know, MicroStrategy is a better company today than it was 4 years ago. A company that can delight its customers. I like making money for my shareholders. I like making money for my employees. I like actually providing a better product for the customer. And people on the outside that don't get Bitcoin, they think, oh, well, that's a speculative asset. You know, it's like, I was on television yesterday. When's it going to go down to 30,000? How can you even ask that question? And like, you don't even understand how this works. People that don't understand engineering don't understand it's perfect money. It was engineered to win. How do you know it's going to win? It's like, how do you know the plane's going to fly? How do you know the gun's going to fire? How do you know the stairs are going to work? Because I'm an engineer. I mean, that's what engineers do. We build stuff. We build rockets. So I think the engineering is key. And the same is true with MicroStrategy. People think, well, that's like you're just getting lucky. You're trading, whatever. We're engineering something. It's a crypto transformer we've engineered here. Just the fact that you have never seen a nuclear reactor doesn't mean that the nuclear reactor doesn't work. I mean, it's like, well, when's the nuclear reactor going to stop spitting out electricity? It's not going to spit out electricity as long as we operate the thing properly. The plane's going to keep flying, right? The gun's going to keep firing. And so I'm not a trader, I'm an engineer.
Okay, we got that cleared up. What is your earliest memory?
I'm 3 years old. My parents take me to church. We come back to the house after church on Sunday afternoon, and that was back in the day. We didn't have enough money to go to restaurants, so what would happen is the people in the congregation would all converge on someone's home for a potluck supper on Sunday afternoon. That Sunday, it's at our house. And we don't have a big house, but when you walk into the house, if you're standing in the foyer, on the right side is the dining room, on the left side is the living room, and behind me is a door into the backyard. As the people are arriving, I'm standing in the foyer looking up at them, and if they're holding a dish in their hand, I'm telling them you should put the dish here in the dining room on the table. And if they don't have a dish and they're an adult, I'm saying the adults are converging, congregating in the living room before lunch. And if they're a kid, I'm saying the kids are playing in the backyard, and I'm actually directing traffic. And some people are listening, but there are a lot of big adults that aren't looking at me, and there are adults with dishes of chicken walking into the living room, and there are kids, that are going into the dining room first. and there are adults without any food going into the dining room before we're ready, and then there are other kids going into the living room instead of going into the backyard, and there are a few adults that are going into the backyard with the kids. And I think this is chaos. I said, what's wrong with these people? Why won't they listen to me? I know what's going on here. Don't they understand? I'm in charge. I should be in charge.
That's fascinating. I feel like that says so much in
my
that
first
little
memory.
story.
Literally my first memory.
All right, last question. Finish this sentence. Bitcoin will win, but...
Not everybody's going to win with it.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a warning as well as advice. So, Michael Saylor, always such a pleasure. Thank you so, so much. I can't wait for the next couple of weeks. I think that New Year's Eve 100K party, that's got to be planned soon.
Thank you, Natalie. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Coin Stories. This show is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing should constitute as official investment advice, and you should always do your own research. My inbox is open. If you want to share feedback or guest suggestions, just reach out at natalie@talkingbitcoin.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the show and check out my free newsletter, nataliebrunell.substack.com. I'll see you next time.